What if the things you bought actually make you feel the most empty? This is where Fight Club begins. Not with Tyler Durden, not in the basement, and not with Project Mayhem, but here. It begins with a man surrounded by everything he was told would make him complete: the right apartment, the right couch, the right coffee table, the right little pieces of personality ordered from a catalog. Edward Norton's narrator doesn't just live in his home, he has curated it, as if he picked the perfect furniture, the perfect brands, the perfect version of adulthood. Maybe he would eventually become a real person inside it. Fight Club looks at the viewer and asks a question that still feels uncomfortable. If everything you own is supposed to define you, what happens when none of it feels like you? Fight Club doesn't begin with rebellion. It begins with absence. This is what makes the movie so unsettling. Before anyone throws a punch, before Tyler Durden turns into a symbol, before the rules become famous, the film gives us a man who is disappearing inside a life that looks completely normal. He goes to work, he travels, he buys things, he keeps moving. From the outside, nothing is obviously wrong, but inside, everything feels hollow. That feeling is the real entry point into the movie. Not violence, not chaos, not the poster on a dorm room wall. Just the quiet terror of realizing you can follow instructions for adulthood and still feel like a stranger inside your own life. You can build the apartment, wear the clothes, choose the furniture, memorize the routines, and somehow, none of it reaches that part of you that needs to feel alive. That is why Fight Club still lingers. It understands emptiness before it understands anger. It understands numbness before it understands destruction. The movie does not ask what happens when a man wants to fight. It asks what happens when a man cannot feel anything at all. And once that question is on the table, everything that follows starts to make a darker kind of sense. The consumerism, the insomnia, the fantasy of Tyler Durden, the first punch in the parking lot, the movement that grows from a basement into something no one can control. All of it begins with that same uncomfortable thought. What if the life you were told to want was never actually yours? And what if some part of you already knows it? Before Tyler Durden becomes the face of Fight Club, Edward Norton gives the movie its real starting point: exhaustion. His narrator is not presented as a rebel. He is not dangerous, charismatic, or even especially dramatic. He is ordinary in a way that feels almost uncomfortable. A man with a job, a suitcase, a clean apartment, and a life built out of routines he no longer believes in. Norton plays him like someone whose personality has been sanded down by repetition. His voice is dry, his eyes are tired, and even when he is surrounded by people, he feels sealed off from them. That is where the movie first starts to question us. Because his problem is not that he has nothing, it is that he has everything he was told would make life feel complete, and none of it does. His apartment is filled with carefully chosen objects, but it doesn't feel like a home. It feels like a showroom for a person he is trying to become. The furniture, the brands, the catalog lifestyle, each piece promises identity, but together, they only reveal how little identity he actually feels. The genius of this opening is that the emptiness is familiar before it becomes extreme. The narrator is not broken in some distant cinematic way. He is disconnected in a way that feels painfully modern. He has mistaken consumption for selfhood. He has confused comfort with meaning. And now, in the middle of all that stability, his body refuses to let him rest. Insomnia becomes the first sign that something deeper is wrong. He cannot sleep because some part of him knows the life he is living does not belong to him. So he drifts through airports, offices, hotel rooms, and support groups, searching for something real enough to break the numbness. And for a moment, he finds it in other people's pain. That is the strange sadness of the beginning. He has to borrow honesty from strangers before he can access his own. Tyler Durden enters Fight Club like a disruption in the system. That's why Brad Pitt's performance matters so much. Tyler does not simply feel like another character stepping into the story. He feels like the movie changing frequency. Everything around the narrator has been beige, sterile, branded, organized, and deadened by routine. Then Tyler appears with wild clothes, sharp confidence, and the kind of physical presence that makes the world around him seem fake by comparison. To the narrator, Tyler looks like freedom. Not healthy freedom, not grounded freedom, but the fantasy version of it. The kind where you never apologize, never hesitate, never worry about becoming acceptable to anyone. He is the opposite of catalog life, the opposite of business traveler, the opposite of a man trying to assemble a personality through furniture and polite conversation. And that is what makes him dangerous. Because Tyler does not just reject consumerism, he offers a replacement identity. He tells the narrator that the things he owns have started owning him. And part of what makes that line so powerful is that the movie has already shown us why that feels true. Tyler's words land because they're aimed at a real wound. The narrator has been trying to buy a self, and Tyler shows up promising one that cannot be purchased. But Fight Club is smart enough to understand that rejection can become its own kind of seduction. Tyler's anti-brand philosophy still becomes a brand of its own. His clothes, his posture, his confidence, his way of talking, they all become something people want to imitate. And that is the trap. The narrator thinks Tyler is freeing him of a false identity, but really, he is being pulled toward another one, a cooler one, a louder one, a more dangerous one. And for a while, that is enough. Because when you feel empty for long enough, even a dangerous answer can feel like the first honest thing you've ever heard. The first fight in Fight Club is strange because it does not play like a movie fight. There's no heroic music, no clean choreography, no sense that either man really knows what he's doing. It happens outside a bar, in a parking lot, under the ugly nighttime glow where everything feels a little exposed. Tyler stands across from the narrator and says a line that changes the entire movie. "I want you to hit me as hard as you can." At first, it sounds ridiculous. Then it starts to sound like a dare. Then, somehow, it starts to sound like a confession. Because what Tyler is really asking is not for violence. It's contact. It's proof. It's a way to break through the numbness that has been swallowing the narrator's life piece by piece. For someone who has spent years feeling like a ghost inside his own routines, the punch becomes less about hurting someone and more about making the world feel solid again. This is why the scene works. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable, it's almost funny. But underneath it, there is something deeply sad. These two men have no language for what they're feeling, so they turn their bodies into conversation. They cannot say they're lonely. They cannot say they're afraid. They cannot say that the lives they've built feel fake. So they hit each other. And for a few seconds, everything becomes simple. Pain cuts through the static. And once it does, the basement becomes inevitable. Fight Club grows because the first fight answers a need neither man fully understands. It gives shape to an emptiness that has been floating around unnamed. Other men show up because they recognize it too. They may not know how to describe it, but they know the feeling. That's the breakthrough. Not that fighting solves anything, but for that one brief moment, it makes them feel alive. The peak of Fight Club is where the movie stops being about a man trying to wake himself up and becomes about what happens when that need spreads. At first, the basement feels like a release valve, a hidden place where men who feel invisible can step outside the branded, polished, professional version of themselves and become something rawer. They are not talking about their feelings, but the feelings are there. In the bruises, in the silence, in the way they keep coming back. The fights give them something their daily lives do not: presence, recognition, and the strange comfort of knowing they're not the only ones who feel empty. But that's exactly what makes it dangerous. Because once Tyler understands that emptiness is shared, he starts shaping it into something bigger. Fight Club becomes more organized, more mythic, more dependent on him. What began as two men outside a bar turns into a room full of people waiting to be told who they are. And that moment is when the movie starts to twist the knife. Tyler is no longer just a fantasy of freedom. He's becoming the architect of belief. This is where the first half of the movie reaches its highest point. The energy is magnetic. The rules are iconic. The basement feels alive. Brad Pitt's Tyler is funny, fearless, and almost impossible to look away from. You understand why people follow him. You understand why the narrator is drawn to him. You understand why a room full of lost people might mistake his intensity for meaning. And then the movie makes you sit with the uncomfortable part. The same force that makes Tyler exciting is the force that makes him dangerous. He knows how to name people's pain, but doesn't know how to heal it. He can burn down the old identity, but the new one he offers is built on surrender. This is not freedom. It's the illusion of it. The shift in Fight Club happens when the fantasy starts asking for payment. For a long time, Tyler feels like liberation. He says the things the narrator cannot say. He rejects the life the narrator cannot escape. He turns emptiness into action, numbness into intensity, and loneliness into something that almost feels like brotherhood. But the longer the movie goes, the harder it becomes to ignore the cost. Tyler does not want the narrator to wake up. He wants him to disappear into the version of Tyler himself has created. That is where Project Mayhem changes everything. The basement was personal. Project Mayhem is not. Fight Club gave men names by letting them feel seen. Project Mayhem strips names away completely. It takes the hunger for meaning and turns it into obedience. No questions, no identity, no self, just the movement, just the mission, just Tyler's voice echoing through the people who have stopped sounding like themselves. And suddenly, the movie's critique of consumerism becomes more complicated. Because Tyler was right about the emptiness of a life built entirely around brands, status, and objects. But being right about the problem does not make him right about the solution. He rejects one system only to build another. He attacks identity sold through products, then replaces it with identity surrendered to ideology. That is the trap the narrator begins to see too late. The thing that made him feel alive is now making him feel irrelevant. The version of himself that once felt fearless has now become reckless. The version that once felt honest has now turned into control. And the more Tyler's influence spreads, the more the narrator realizes he is not leading this. He is not even standing beside it anymore. He is being erased by it. This is the real shift in the Fight Club. Not the twist, not the reveal, not the moment everything clicks into place. It's the slow horror of realizing that the thing you created to save yourself may no longer need you at all. The goodbye in the Fight Club is not clean, because the movie is not really interested in clean redemption. By the time the narrator understands the truth, Tyler has already done what Tyler was built to do. He is broken through the numbness. He has shattered the polite, branded catalog version of life that made the narrator feel invisible. He has taken all that buried frustration and turned it into motion. For a while, that felt like freedom, like waking up. But the ending forces a harder question. What do you do when the thing that woke you up starts destroying everything around you? That is where Tyler stops being seductive and starts becoming tragic. Because he was never just a villain. He was the narrator's pain with confidence, his loneliness with a voice, his emptiness dressed up as certainty. Tyler made suffering feel powerful, and that is why he's so dangerous. He didn't erase the wound. He gave the wound a philosophy. So the goodbye is not about rejecting every part of him. It's about separating the truth from the poison. Yes, the narrator's life was hollow. Yes, the consumer world around him was selling identity back to him, one product at a time. Yes, he needed to wake up. But Tyler's answer was never healing. Tyler's answer was escalation. Burn it down. Push further. Feel more. Lose yourself completely and call it freedom. The narrator finally sees the difference, and that is the goodbye. Not a heroic victory, not a perfect cure, just a painful moment when a person stops mistaking intensity for meaning. Because Tyler gave him a way to escape himself. But what the narrator needs now is something harder. He has to return to himself. Not the polished version, not the fearless version, not the fantasy, the real one. Still damaged, still awake, but finally willing to live without hiding behind someone else. The legacy of Fight Club is that it became a mirror that people kept arguing with. When it opened in 1999, it did not arrive as an easy classic. It was too cold, too angry, too funny in the wrong places, and too uncomfortable to explain in a trailer. It had Brad Pitt at his most magnetic, Edward Norton at his most hollowed out, and David Fincher turning a studio movie into something that felt like a controlled demolition of modern identity. But audiences did not immediately know what to do with it. Some critics saw satire, some saw irresponsibility, some saw danger. And in a way, all of those reactions became a part of the film's afterlife. Because Fight Club did not really become Fight Club in theaters. It became Fight Club later, in bedrooms, in dorm rooms, in apartments, in late-night DVD rewatches. It became the movie someone handed you like a secret. The movie people quoted before they fully understood it. The movie that felt different depending on how old you were when you found it. At 16, Tyler Durden could feel like liberation. At 30, he starts to look like the kind of person you should have been warned about. That is the strange power of the film. It does not stay still. Its meaning shifts with you. The consumerism that once felt like the main target starts to feel like the only surface. The real wound is deeper. The fear that you have built yourself out of things, out of routines, out of performances, and borrowed ideas, and still do not know who is underneath. That's why the misreading matters too. Some people turn Tyler into an icon when the movie was showing him as a warning. But that tension is part of why Fight Club still feels alive. It forces the viewer to ask not just what the movie means, but why certain parts of it appeal to them. And maybe that is the real legacy. Not the rules, not the quotes, not the poster, but the question it leaves behind. What version of yourself are you still mistaking for freedom? Fight Club stays with you because it refuses to stay as one thing. At first, it looks like a movie about rebellion. Then, it starts to look like a movie about masculinity, consumerism, and late 90s emptiness. Then, the more distance you get from it, it starts to feel like something more personal than all of that. A story about the danger of becoming so disconnected from yourself that any feeling, even the wrong one, starts to feel like salvation. That's why the movie still works. Not because Tyler Durden is right. Not because the destruction is cool. Not because the slogans still sound good when they're pulled out of context. It works because underneath all of that, there is a lonely, exhausted person trying to figure out why the life he was sold does not feel like living. And maybe that's the part that never really ages. The brands change, the catalogs change, the apartments change. The screens get smaller, then bigger, then live in our hands. But the question remains the same. How much of the person you are was chosen by you? And how much was assembled from what the world told you to want? That's the uncomfortable thing Fight Club leaves behind. It does not offer a clean answer. It does not let Tyler be a hero. It does not let the narrator be innocent. It leaves everyone somewhere messier, somewhere more human, standing in the wreckage of false self and wondering what comes next. And maybe that's why people are still talking about it. Because the movie does not just ask you who Tyler Durden is. It asks you who you become when you're tired of being yourself, and whether that version is freedom or just another cage.